Today, we will be talking about the chief developments of the Byzantine Empire during the time of 750 CE to 1025 CE. This time is considered what many would call the zenith of the Byzantine Empire. This is because this would be the peak of the empire, where it at its best in political structure and stability, wealth and prosperity, uh, relationship between the rulers and their people, religious identity and culture, as well as military power and territory size. Uh, a big part of this was also um, just the stark contrast between where the empire started at the beginning of this era to the end of this era and the great increase that they made. Because at the beginning of this time, they really started as a weakened, fallen state, um, partially because of two factors. The first was the fall, the loss of a lot of their territories, and the other was the religious division that spread between them and the rest of Western Europe. So in 750 CE, much of the territory of the Byzantine Empire was lost. This would just to external enemies around them that were constantly attacking and invading, and they would continue to put that pressure on the empire throughout the 7th century and the 8th century until many emperors later would uh, start to push back on them finally. Now, with this loss of territory, it really left the Byzantine Empire to constitute just from, or be constituted of just Asia Minor, some land in the Balkans, and a small portion of Italy. This together made up just a very small part of what the Byzantine Empire used to be. And this left it in a very weakened state with not many resources or not a very large size. It lost a lot of its power and authority in the area. It would stay this way for a long time um, until the 8th century, where they started to experience religious strife as well, and a lot of religious conflict. Um, so throughout this time, there's the division between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. The Byzantine Empire is predominantly the Eastern Orthodox Church, and big part of the conflict between the two is iconoclasm, which is the opposition to icons. The Catholic Church used icons very predominantly to as a tool to worship God, whereas the Eastern Orthodox Church believed that these icons were actually idols that were replacing worship of God. And so this conflict led to a lot of iconoclasts, to that people that would destroy icons or cause damage to these icons, especially in the Byzantine Empire. This would happen for a very long time until 843 under Michael III, when iconoclasm was abolished. Uh, this would lead to a lot of strife between iconoclasts and those who were upholding this abolishment of iconoclasm. Uh, on top of this, not too long later, there'd be a dispute between the Pope of the Western Church and the Patriarch of Constantinople of the Eastern Church over who was in leadership, and the Patriarch of Constantinople would uh, really come out from underneath the Pope as his own um, head of the Eastern Church. Now, this led to a lot of political strife between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, or the Byzantine Empire and the rest of Western Europe. So these things really led to a lot of pressure externally, whether it's from enemies or from the Western Church or Western Europe, and this really didn't help the Byzantine Empire in their weakened state until the arisal of the Macedonian empires. The Macedonian empires are the empires from 867 to 1056 CE. This group of empires are really the emperors that brought um, Byzantine back into a place of prosperity and really began to turn around this weakened state. So the first thing that the Macedonians did was hold off external enemies. They started to push back against those external enemies that have been uh, causing that pressure on the boundaries of the territories. So they were no longer losing any territory to these external enemies. Part of this and part of their internal change that allowed them to do this was advocating for their free farmers. They're advocating for the freedom of farmers. This allowed them to be prosperous on their own and not be underneath others. And a big reason why this helped them in those efforts against external enemies was farmers made up a large portion of their cavalry, which was one of the primary strengths of their military. So they started to make these internal changes that allowed them to make changes and gain, at least hold ground at the borders. Um, Now, with the borders being held in place and maintained, they were able to start expanding their trade routes into Western Europe. Uh, because of this expansion of trade routes, their prosperity and wealth exploded, and they soon became known for their size and their wealth throughout Europe. This increased their prosperity and their wealth and their resources as well as their influence in these places. Because of this prosperity, uh, they would start to um, pursue missionary efforts into adjacent lands to start spreading the Eastern Orthodox religion. This included preaching to the Serbs and the Bulgars, and even converting a Russian prince in 987. Alongside this, as they started to grow in resources, they started to actually strengthen their political and infrastructure stability. This included um, the systemizing of the law and code of law, and establishing just their governmental structure. Um, Specifically, this was done a lot under Leo the Wise, who composed works of politics and theology, systemized many of the rules of trade and the conduct of court officials, and uh, arranged for a new code of Byzantine law. Really made official the law with documentation and codification. This was really all happening during the 8th and 9th century, where they were starting to really grow in resources and power and stability again after so much loss of territory and religious struggle. And now in the emperors in the 10th century were in a place where they could start to mobilize the empire's military, start to push back against those external enemies that were causing all that pressure at their borders, and start to actually go on the offense, start to expand their borders again, start to rebuild their size until eventually they were the same size as they had been at the beginning of the 7th century. Finally, back to that strength and size. Key factors in this was Basil II. He was a key emperor at this time. He defeated the Bulgars and annexed Bulgaria, and he also would later go on to conquer the islands of Crete and Cyprus. Between him and the other emperors of the 10th century, they were able to bring the empire back to its full size, not only as big as it was, but also more prosperous with a better stability and structure underneath it, and a better relationship between its emperors and its people, a better identity in their religion, um, and also better culture in just general. Their law was better established, which increased that stability, and their military was strengthened and bigger than it was before. And these were all the different factors that really played into um, the fall and then the rise back up to an even better place than it was before for the Byzantine Empire.